Well, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to discuss the intricacies of protein, and I'm going to start out by giving you an example. I worked with an athlete who had the belief that if he ate more protein, that would translate into more muscle, and more muscle would translate into better performance. So how did his day begin? What he actually did was get up in the morning and have a protein shake, really tried to stay away from carbohydrates, would look for the protein shakes that had the least amount of carbohydrate and the most amount of protein. Similarly, at lunch, what he would do is he would concentrate on chicken and fish or red meat on his plate and just put a few vegetables off to the side. His belief was eating more protein would translate into more muscle mass. What actually ended up happening is his performance was compromised on the field. He didn't have enough carbohydrate, and from previous lectures we've learned that carbohydrate is the preferred fuel of exercising muscle. So bottom line for him was we needed to reorder his diet. The protein was important, but it could not be important at the expense of carbohydrate. So as we begin this discussion on protein, we're going to do a little brief history. Protein actually comes from the Greek word meaning primary or proteos. It was first described by a Swedish chemist by the name of Berzelius in 1838. However, the first protein to be sequenced into its individual amino acids was insulin by Dr. Sanger, who won the Nobel Prize in 1958. So protein and amino acids, how are those two things interconnected? Amino acids are the building block of protein. So when Dr. Sanger actually sequenced this, he discovered which amino acid, which building block went in which order to produce insulin. As you might remember, insulin is the hormone responsible for getting not only glucose or carbohydrate into the cell, but other essential nutrients as well. So we know that protein is an indispensable nutrient, meaning it must be consumed in the diet. Your body has no other way of getting in this essential nutrient other than what you can consume. So again, that's why it comes from the Greek word primary, proteos, to mean that it is a primary importance in the diet. Well, protein can be found in every single tissue in the body. For example, it's in your skin, in your hair, and even in your bone and muscle. We don't really think of bone as being protein, but there are actually protein-producing cells within your bone to build the matrix by which bone is built around. And certainly we kind of think protein and muscle go hand in hand. So what makes this nutrient so unique? Well, as opposed to carbohydrate and fat, protein contains the element nitrogen. And indeed, protein is about 16% nitrogen. So many of the waste products of protein metabolism are going to be nitrogen-based compounds. So the urea, which is found in urine, is a nitrogen-containing compound. Nitrogen is the central element in amino acids, the building block of proteins. Well, at least 10,000 different proteins of different shapes and sizes have helped to build your body and help to maintain it. With genetic codes as a blueprint, protein is built from amino acids. So think about it this way. Think about this genetic code like an architectural design. It tells you where the plumbing goes, the electrical wiring, and within your body, the genetic code helps to lay out what kind of proteins are built from these amino acids at what point in time. The sequencing of these amino acids is so precise that the sequencing determines the protein structure. So we have a limited amount of amino acids, but an infinite array of how we can arrange those amino acids in a different sequence to get a different protein structure. Now, amino acids, there are about approximately 20 basic building blocks that the body uses, following the instructions from our genes that assembles all the necessary proteins. While some genetic codes require short chains of amino acids, maybe as few as 6 or 8, others require multiple long chains that are intertwined, becomes actually a three-dimensional structure, very complex, that could be as intricate as a tangled ball of twine. I want you to think about this. If we have this very, very complex structure that's all intertwined, When you digest that protein, and remember we've talked about digestion in a previous lecture, when you digest that protein, that wonderful acid in your stomach helps to untangle that ball of twine. It helps to unwind it. When the hydrochloric acid in your gut or in your stomach untangles that ball of twine, that word is called, it denatures that protein. It changes that protein structure. It renders it not the same as the original version. So I'll give you an example. You can see denatured protein every time you have eggs for breakfast. You think about your raw egg. Egg is a great source of protein. And you see the clear albumin-like structure that is egg white. When you put that egg in a pan and provide heat to that egg, you are denaturing that protein, and you can actually see that happen before your eyes. You can see it go from a clear, kind of viscous solution to something that is white and solid. You are denaturing that protein structure. You are untangling that ball of twine, and you end up with a different product. Another example of denaturing protein is if you've ever had a permanent to make your hair curly, you are denaturing that protein structure in your hair and making it do something else. You are changing it, and essentially when you have a permanent in your hair, you're weakening it. Well, within that amino acid compound, there are essential amino acids. There are specific amino acids that you must have in your diet. Your diet requires that you have these. The essential amino acids include histidine, leucine, isoleucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. Now, why do I need to know those words? Well, the next time you go to the health food store and you see someone recommending lysine for cold sores, well, now you can say, okay, I understand that's an essential amino acid. When you look at a can of diet soda and there's a warning label on the back if it contains NutraSweet saying this product contains phenylalanine, you know that in that food product there's an essential amino acid. Now, non-essential amino acids are important for creating protein. They're just as vital as the essential ones. So why the word non-essential? Non-essential means that under normal circumstances of wellness, you can make those non-essential amino acids in your body. The non-essential amino acids are alanine, arginine, asparagine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamine, glutamic acid, glycine, proline, serine, and tyrosine. So does it feel like a chemistry lesson yet? I think the key again is I can go to the health food store and take a look at a muscle building product that contains arginine, and you think, I don't know what arginine is. Well, now you can refer back to your list of non-essential amino acids and say, aha, I understand that that is a non-essential amino acid. My body needs it for protein synthesis, but in most cases, I can make it. Now, I think it's also critical here to understand that we're talking about these non-essential amino acids being made by your body when you are well. There are conditions and circumstances in your life that your body can't keep up with this demand. It just can't keep up with the demand for these non-essential. So sometimes, and depending on the source that you read, you'll see some of these amino acids shuffled between essential and non-essential. Part of that is because during periods of stress and illness, your body may actually need some dietary support of these traditionally non-essential amino acids. Certainly the other reason to understand why these are important is that there are diseases of amino acid metabolism, which we'll talk about in a little bit. NutraSweet, which is also marketed under the name Equal, and its chemical name is aspartame, is two amino acids that together are sweet and apart are not. So have you ever had a diet soda that you open up the can and you think, this just really tastes like carbonated water? What has happened is, in the presence of heat, and probably that soda was stored in a warehouse, in the presence of heat, this two amino acid structure has been split apart and is no longer sweet. You can also do a little experiment at home if you ever have hot cocoa that is sweetened with NutraSweet or Equal. If you let it sit in that glass for a prolonged period of time, what ends up happening is it starts out pretty sweet, and then lo and behold, over a period of time, as those two amino acids are separating, that product becomes less sweet. So you can actually do your own chemistry lesson at home and test your own hot cocoa concoction. Well, let's now look a little bit on protein function. What does protein do? What makes it so indispensable? Probably the most highlighted function of protein is to build and repair tissue. Now think about that. That's a really pretty important concept. We're building and repairing tissue. So when in the life cycle would you build the most tissue? Well, during periods of rapid growth and development, protein needs are going to increase. Now, when is this going to occur? Well, think about infancy. In infancy, babies can triple their birth weight in that first year of life. So per pound of body weight, babies have a really high protein need. Why? Because they're in the process of building tissue. Now, if you've ever had surgery, you've actually created a wound, you've actually created damage to that protein structure, i.e. your skin, your muscles, your bone, and you need extra protein to repair it. Oftentimes what people believe, however, is that when they're laying flat in the bed from surgery, that somehow they don't need as many calories or protein, and physiologically that's not true. Your need for both of those nutrients goes up significantly. You also have structural proteins like collagen. You have mechanical proteins such as actin and myosin that are found in muscle. Now these two proteins are indispensable in terms of you even getting up out of your chair. What ends up happening in muscular contraction is these two proteins slide over each other. In fact, it's called the sliding filament theory. They slide over each other to promote contraction. So one of the reasons why athletes always believe that they need more protein is to create more actin and myosin to actually have these protein molecules slide over one another. Now, in the process of weightlifting, you're actually trying to increase the mechanical strength of those proteins. So when individuals do resistance training, for example, we have these actin and myosin fibers that are sliding over one another, and they actually tear. You think, oh my goodness, I'm tearing my muscle? That's desirable. You're actually causing some micro tears, and so the function of protein being build and repair, we now have more amino acids, more protein going to the damaged actin and myosin filaments and causing that muscle to hypertrophy or get bigger. So one of the reasons why strength training is so important is it increases the muscular work and the mechanical demand that's created by resistance training. So these are the two proteins that predominate in muscle mass, indispensable in terms of your mechanical function. We also know that we need protein for the immune function. The immune function, white blood cells, are protein in nature. So in my clinical practice, where I see lots and lots of folks with anorexia nervosa, one of the key hallmarks is they have a diminished amount of white blood cells. And so they are unable to fight off as much infection. Now you can have someone who eats well, who believes that they're eating adequate amounts of protein. But in my 30 years of experience, most individuals with eating disorders don't do that, so most of them end up having a compromised immune function. Now certainly another function of protein is in the synthesis of enzymes. Compounds, these are compounds that accelerate chemical reactions, but they're not broken down themselves. So for example, lactase is that wonderful enzyme that helps to digest milk sugar, which is lactose. Transaminase, trans means transfer, amine means amino acid, ase means enzyme. Transaminase helps in the synthesis of non-essential amino acids. Certainly we know that hormones are going to be protein, and they are chemical messengers that are produced in one part of the body, but actually used in another. So that, again, remember that first protein sequence that we knew about was insulin. So insulin is a protein. Now think about this for a minute. If somebody has type 1 diabetes and has to use insulin to take care of themselves, to get that transport function of insulin, they have to inject insulin. Why is that the case? Because insulin, like any protein, is going to be broken down in the gut and in the small intestine and is going to be rendered ineffective. So if you see a commercial or something talking about a new dietary supplement that you can just take by mouth and it's an insulin mimic and you can take it by mouth, you need to scratch your head and say, wait a minute here, that can't possibly be true because insulin is a protein and it's going to be digested just like any other protein. Glucagon, its opposing hormone, is also a protein. Proteins can also be integral in the creation of what's called an acid-base balance. Now, most substances in our body are neither all acidic or all basic. We're designed to kind of live down the middle of that pH road. However, increased amounts of protein, think amino acid, increased amounts of protein in the diet can actually yield excess hydrogen ion or excess acid. These compounds can have to be excreted. That extra acid has to be excreted. And most science is going to suggest that an increased amount of protein creates an increased amount of hydrogen ion that needs to be urinated out. So the research is going to suggest that this increased urinary acid load coming from protein can actually increase the likelihood of some forms of kidney stones. So again, some protein might be good and you need it for building and repairing tissue and all the other wonderful functions, but too much of a good thing, as we're learning, is not always a good thing. Now also, what ends up happening in terms of protein function is we have proteins that serve as a transport function. They transport drugs, vitamins, and minerals throughout our body. Probably the most important of these is albumin. And anytime you've had blood work done, if you've had a complete blood work profile, you'll see albumin as one of the things that they measure. It's central in terms of its transport function. So if albumin carries drugs, vitamins, and minerals, what's going to happen when your albumin is low? Well, when albumin is low, if the physician prescribes the same amount of drug, now that drug doesn't have a carrier protein anymore. It doesn't have a transport carrier. So it's floating around in your blood supply as free drug, and pharmacists get a little bit nervous because you can end up having an adverse reaction to a prescription medication if the protein in your blood is low. Transferrin is linked with iron transport, and retinol binding protein actually will help to carry vitamin A. We also know that protein is important in the balance of fluid. Protein in your blood hangs on to the water that's in your blood. Remember, your blood has a significant amount of fluid in it. It hangs on to the fluid and prevents that fluid from leaking into the non-vascular space in between cells. So with inadequate amounts of protein, inadequate amounts of albumin probably most notably, that water can leak from your blood into your tissues. So what's going to happen? You will gain weight. But did you gain body fat? The answer is no. So I can step on a scale. If the albumin in my blood is low, I can step on the scale and that water has shifted from the vascular space into my tissue. My scale weight goes up, but lo and behold, I really haven't gained any body fat. So I will remind you over and over that the scale can help us determine fluid balance, but it really can't help us to determine the composition of that weight. Critical illness, and this is so key, critical illness almost always presents with fluid retention. And so you will see loved ones, if you go into an ICU, you'll see loved ones who look a little puffy and edematous, they're retaining extra fluid. Part of that is albumin drops as part of the stress response. Albumin is always going to drop as part of that stress response, and fluid is going to leak into that non-vascular space. Again, that's going to be fluid that is not available to urinate out. So what are other functions of protein? It is a source of energy. And really, it shouldn't be highlighted as a primary source, and it's really listed down further on our list, because your body can use protein as an energy source, 4 calories a gram, just like carbohydrate. But that's not its primary intent. Its primary intent is all those other functions that we just listed. However, if I don't take in adequate amounts of carbohydrate, if carbohydrate is deficient in my diet, in Mother Nature's infinite wisdom, protein is going to be sent to the liver. That nitrogen is going to be stripped off. Remember, that's what makes it unique. The nitrogen is going to be stripped off, and the remnant, that amino acid without the nitrogen, that remnant now can be turned into carbohydrate in our liver. So my athlete, who honestly believed that what he was doing is creating more muscle by eating lots and lots of protein, was actually sending a lot of that protein to his liver to make carbohydrate. The problem is it couldn't keep up with his demand for overall calories, and so he was experiencing significant fatigue. So one of the biggest mistakes people make in terms of the athletic world is they believe carbohydrates are evil. They ramp up their protein, not realizing what I've done is take very expensive protein, send it to my liver, and produce carbohydrate. So I will describe it this way. Protein is designed for the building and repairing of tissue, and I don't need to use it as an energy source. However, if I'm going to use it for energy, it's like trying to heat your house, and instead of using traditional fuel, you decide you're going to throw $100 bills on your fireplace. That's what you do when you use protein as an energy source. You have a much cheaper fuel in carbohydrate and even fat, much cheaper fuel. And now what you're doing is taking that indispensable nitrogen-containing compound and throwing it away, burning it as an energy source. So it can be a source of energy, but it really is not a primary source. We can also look to protein to help us in weight management. Protein leaves your stomach slowly. It leaves your stomach slowly. And so what that does is create this sense of fullness or satiety. When you go to the grocery store, you'll see weight management products, you'll see breakfast cereals where they've added protein to it. And the reason they're doing that is to promote that feeling of fullness or that feeling of satiety. Now, in order to get all of this work done, the body needs a daily supply of amino acids to make new protein because we don't store protein. We can store fat. We have an endless ability as human beings, unfortunately, to store fat. We have a small ability to store carbohydrate in our muscles and our liver, but we cannot store protein. So I want you to think about that. If we can't store it, any loss of body protein is going to represent loss of function. We've just listed all the wonderful functions of protein. If we don't consistently replenish that protein on a daily basis, we will lose protein from some part of our body, and any loss of protein can represent loss of function because we don't have stores. The stores that we have are truly indispensable: muscle, liver, white blood cells, all those other wonderful tissues. Now, some proteins contain all of the essential amino acids, all of the amino acids that we need to build new proteins. They are oftentimes called complete proteins. Now, usually they are of animal origin. For example, things like milk, cheese, chicken, fish, or red meat. Now, you know there's always going to be the exception to the rule, and an exception to the rule is going to be soybean. Soybean is a complete protein, but it's not of animal origin, it's a plant protein. So when you see soybean products on the market or you're eating tofu or other products like that, that really is a complete protein and is equally nutritious as other sources of complete proteins containing all the essential amino acids. However, other proteins that might be missing an essential amino acid or they're not contained in an adequate amount. These are called incomplete proteins. They're lacking one or more essential amino acids. So in bread, if you look at a loaf of bread at the grocery store, most breads will tell you they contain between 2 and 3 grams of protein per serving. Well, it's not a complete protein, it's an incomplete protein. It is missing an essential amino acid. Similarly with nuts and rice and beans and vegetables, all good sources of protein, but by themselves are incomplete. They're going to need a companion. They're going to need something else to balance out that essential amino acid that's missing. And what this is called is combining proteins. You combine a protein that complements the missing amino acid in an alternative way and makes a complete protein. So I want you to think about this just like you'd think about spelling the word Alabama. Well, can I spell Alabama if I only have one A? And the answer is no. I'm missing the other A's that I'm going to need to spell that word. So here's what happens. If you have a missing amino acid, or that amino acid is in short supply, protein synthesis stops. It doesn't slow, it stops because I'm missing the structures to complete that protein. I can't make it, just like I can't spell Alabama with one A. And what this is called is a limiting amino acid. A limiting amino acid, a missing essential amino acid, stops that protein synthesis. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you're getting a balance of protein-containing foods. The only time I ever really see an issue with this in the United States is in people who decide to become vegan. If you're vegan, what that means is you eliminate all sources of animal protein, and you can become unbelievably healthy on a vegan diet. You just have to be a little bit wise in the way that you're combining proteins. So for example, cereal grains are low in the essential amino acid lysine, and soybeans and other beans can be used in place of low lysine foods to complement that. So we used to believe that you had to have these two protein-containing foods, these two incomplete proteins like rice and beans. You had to have them at the same meal, and the science doesn't support that any longer. You have to have them within the same day, but you don't have to have them within the same meal. So good examples would be rice and beans. Red beans and rice would be a great example of complementary proteins. Peanut butter, a nut, bread, a grain, complementary protein. So if you're pretty fond of getting up in the morning and starting out your day with a spoonful of peanut butter and a banana, you have an incomplete protein, but at 10 o'clock in the morning, if you have a granola bar, you've now had that missing essential amino acid. It wasn't at the same meal, but it was in the same day. So again, it's not really very difficult to balance this out if indeed you're just eating on a frequent basis. Okay, what are our protein needs? Now you have to be, I guess, a little adept at going from pounds to kilos, because all of the protein requirements that you're going to see listed in textbooks are going to be listed based on a kilogram of body weight, not pounds of body weight. So remember, to get from pounds to kilos, you divide by 2.2, and we'll have that in your guidebook. Normal adult needs are less than a gram per kilo. In fact, most normal adult needs are 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, I've got a little problem here, because what body weight do we use? Do we use our ideal body weight, which we've learned to calculate, or our actual body weight? Well, if you're within a normal weight range, you're not too thin, you're not too heavy, you can actually use your actual body weight. If you are on a weight management plan and you're trying to lose weight, you probably need to use your ideal body weight, because again, excess body fat doesn't have the same demand for protein or amino acids as muscle does. Conversely, if I'm a very physically active person, I probably want to use my actual weight, even if I'm 20 or 30 pounds overweight based on the scale. Okay? So what we know is during periods of active growth and development, protein requirements are higher. And in infancy, it's 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So these babies are growing machines, and as such need a significantly greater amount of protein than you do as an adult, but it's per kilogram of body weight. Another period of rapid growth is during adolescence and during puberty, and individuals going through adolescence, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Now, some thoughts and some schools of thought suggest as we grow older, we don't absorb protein as effectively. And so the protein requirements for older Americans may be greater than the traditional adult requirements. But I'm going to say this is emerging science, and stay tuned. Now, what happens if you're an athlete? You have rapid development, you're really trying to increase your muscular mass. And endurance athletes, and who are those? Those are individuals who run marathons or triathletes, or let's say you bike race. Those would be all examples of endurance athletes. They need anywhere between 1.2 and 1.4 grams of protein per kilo. Strength athletes, and strength athletes in my definition are anybody who lifts weights in a serious fashion. So traditionally we can think of football players, but I would also tell you that in most college and high school programs, almost all athletes except for the marathon runners are going to be in there lifting weights. So we could argue that anybody who lifts weights is going to fall into this category. And their requirements are 1.6 to 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So is it true that an athlete needs more protein? And the answer is yes. But I'm going to tell you, in my experience with my Rice football players, I used to track how many grams of protein they were getting. They were consuming up to 4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I'm going to tell you, colossal waste of money. And keep in mind, I'm increasing that urinary acid load and may increase the likelihood of kidney stones. Injury and repair, again, your body's trying to heal itself. The protein requirements are 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. Insignificant injury, and probably the most significant injury I can list for you, would be in burns. If someone's had a significant thermal injury, their protein requirements can actually exceed that 2 grams of protein per kilogram. Now, what about protein deficiencies? Are there other disorders or protein excess? Well, yes, there is a protein deficiency disease called marasmus. And many of these are African words. Marasmus, calorie and protein deficiency. The classic example of that is anorexia nervosa. You can have someone who's eating what appears to be a healthy diet, fruits, vegetables, maybe some tofu thrown in, but the calories and the protein are inadequate. Hypoalbuminemic malnutrition. Now that's a mouthful. Hypoalbuminemic, let's dissect that word out. Hypo means low. Albumin is that wonderful blood protein. Emic means in the blood. Hypoalbuminemic malnutrition, low albumin in the blood. Low albumin can be caused by stress response. Now that stress response is not you've had a bad day at the office. The stress response means you've had a physical insult. You've been burned, you've been shot, anything that's a physical insult. During times of physical stress, the body chews up protein. Even though we have lots and lots and lots of body fat, most of us, lots of calories stored as body fat. During times of physical stress, unfortunately, the body preferentially chews up protein. Give you a tragic example that I encountered early in my career. We had a woman come into the hospital that I was working at, and she was having a bunion repaired, truly minor surgery. And she was maybe my height, 5'4", and somewhere in the range of 300 pounds. And no one asked her, and that means including me, had she lost weight in the last 6 months. And she had. She'd lost about 100 pounds involuntarily because she had pneumonia. So that pneumonia caused a physical stress, and even though she was overweight, she had lost a significant amount of body protein, and her hospital stay was prolonged. She ended up infected, all kinds of complications, because again, she had hypoalbuminemic malnutrition caused by the physical stress of pneumonia. Now, keep in mind, excess protein doesn't translate into increased function. Protein excess can contribute to obesity. If you exceed your protein requirements and you don't need any more protein, that now becomes to your body a caloric excess. And I have to tell you, the tragedy to me includes what happens to professional football players. It's eat more protein, eat more protein, eat more protein. And honestly, the bottom line is too many calories are going to make any of us fat, whether it comes from protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Excess calories are always going to be converted into body fat. Now, most sources of complete protein also contain animal fat, and therein lies the issue. A defect in amino acid metabolism can alter protein function, sequence, and protein synthesis can stop. So keep in mind there are going to be some genetic disorders that alter protein metabolism. Sickle cell disease, for example, valine, one of those amino acids, just substitutes on that chain for glutamic acid, and instead of the red blood cell being circular, it sickles or looks like a crescent moon. Phenylketonuria is the inability to convert phenylalanine, that essential amino acid, to tyrosine. Phenylalanine can build up in the blood and cause brain damage. And remember that phenylalanine is part of NutraSweet. Thank you very much.